On the morning of November 10, 1898, the streets of Wilmington, North Carolina, echoed with the sounds of gunfire, terror, and destruction. What began as a bustling, prosperous black majority city was about to be transformed by a violent coup, one that would erase decades of black political and economic progress in a matter of hours. This wasn't just a riot or an uprising. It was a carefully planned and executed overthrow of a legally elected government. But how did Wilmington, a city once seen as a beacon of black success in the South, become the site of the only successful coup in American history? Who were the men behind this deadly conspiracy? And why has this chapter of history remained buried for over a century? The Wilmington Coup of 1898 wasn't just an isolated event. It was a turning point in the fight for civil rights, a brutal reminder of how far white supremacists would go to maintain power. The consequences of that day rippled through generations, shaping the racial and political landscape of the United States. This is the untold story of a coup that shattered democracy, of the lies that fueled it, and of the resilience of those who fought to reclaim their history. This is the history they tried to erase. And today, we uncover the truth. Welcome to Old Around the World, where we travel back in time to bring history back to life. In the years following the Civil War, Wilmington, North Carolina, became a beacon of black prosperity and political power. By the 1890s, the city had a majority black population, with African Americans excelling in business, education, and government. Black professionals, including doctors, lawyers, and newspaper editors, thrived, while black-owned businesses flourished in the bustling downtown area. Wilmington was a rare example of a southern city where black citizens exercised their political rights effectively. At the heart of this success was a political alliance known as the Fusion Movement, a coalition of black Republicans and white populists. Together, they secured electoral victories that put black leaders in key government positions. Black men held seats on the city council, served as police officers, and even worked as postmasters. This collaboration threatened the traditional democratic establishment, which had long relied on white supremacy to maintain power. White elites, particularly the Democratic Party leaders, resented the fusion government. They viewed black political participation as an attack on white dominance and feared the growing influence of black professionals. White newspapers published inflammatory articles painting black men as threats to white women and portraying black leaders as corrupt and unfit to govern. These narratives stoked fear and resentment among white voters, laying the foundation for a brutal response. Despite the growing tensions, Wilmington's black community remained hopeful. They believed that the legal and political gains made during Reconstruction would protect their rights. However, white supremacist groups, emboldened by racist propaganda, began organizing against them. The fragile peace that had allowed black Wilmington to flourish was now on the verge of collapse. As the 1898 election approached, the white elite prepared to dismantle the fusion government by any means necessary. What started as political maneuvering would soon escalate into one of the darkest chapters in American history, a violent coup that would strip black citizens of their rights and change the course of the South forever. In the months leading up to the 1898 election, North Carolina Democrats launched a statewide white supremacy campaign. Led by influential figures like Josephus Daniels, editor of the News and Observer, and Charles B. Aycock, a future governor, the movement aimed to suppress black political power through fear, propaganda, and violence. Their goal was clear: to reclaim control of Wilmington and eliminate black influence in government. Newspapers and political rallies fueled racial hatred, spreading false stories about black men as violent criminals preying on white women. These fear-mongering tactics resonated with white voters, many of whom were struggling with economic hardship and eager to blame black progress for their misfortunes. The campaign's slogan, "North Carolina is a white man's state," made it clear that the goal was total racial domination. One of the most incendiary moments came when Alexander Manley, a black newspaper editor, published an editorial in the Daily Record, Wilmington's black-owned newspaper. He refuted the racist myth that black men were predators, arguing that consensual relationships existed between black men and white women. This editorial enraged white supremacists, who used it as justification for the violent actions they were about to unleash. Armed militias known as Red Shirts patrolled Wilmington and other areas, intimidating black voters and their white allies. These armed groups disrupted political meetings, assaulted black citizens, and warned fusion leaders not to contest the upcoming election. The message was clear: black political power would not be tolerated. As Election Day approached, fear gripped the black community. Many knew that violence was imminent, but few could have predicted the scale of the terror that was about to unfold. The white supremacist campaign had set the stage for a coup, one that would destroy Wilmington's black leadership and reinforce white dominance for generations. On November 8, 1898, Wilmington's black citizens and their allies went to the polls under the shadow of intimidation. White militias stationed themselves near polling places, threatening black voters and fusionists. Some black voters were turned away entirely, while others were forced to vote for Democrats under duress. The democratic process had been compromised before it even began. In many parts of the state, Democrats used ballot stuffing and outright fraud to secure their victory. Fake votes were counted, and legitimate ballots from black citizens were discarded. White election officials manipulated the results, ensuring that the Democratic Party would take control of North Carolina's government. In Wilmington, the fusionist government, though weakened, still remained in power for now. Despite these corrupt tactics, Wilmington's local government had not yet fallen. The city's elected officials, including black aldermen and police officers, remained in office. This angered white supremacists, who saw the election as only the first step in their plan. The next phase would be violent and decisive. In the days following the election, white leaders in Wilmington, led by former Confederate officer Alfred Moore Waddell, planned to remove black officials by force. They issued the White Declaration of Independence, demanding that black leaders resign and leave the city. If they refused, violence would be the consequence. With tensions at a boiling point, Wilmington's black residents braced for the worst. Many hoped for peace, believing that the rule of law would protect them. But the Democratic leaders had no intention of following the law. Instead, they were preparing for an armed overthrow of the government. At dawn on November 10, 1898, white supremacist militias, led by Waddell, marched through Wilmington armed with rifles and pistols. Their first target was the Daily Record, the black-owned newspaper that had published Alexander Manley's controversial editorial. The mob stormed the building, setting it ablaze and destroying the press that had dared to challenge white supremacy. With the newspaper destroyed, the mob turned its attention to black neighborhoods and political leaders. They began forcibly removing black officials from office, replacing them with hand-picked white Democrats. The coup was now fully underway. Wilmington's government was being overthrown by force. As black citizens gathered in protest, violence erupted. White militias opened fire, killing an unknown number of black residents. Some were shot in the streets, while others were hunted down in their homes. The chaos spread quickly, with white mobs looting and burning black-owned businesses. Panic set in as families fled for their lives. Many black residents sought refuge in the swamps and forests surrounding Wilmington. Others attempted to escape by train, but white supremacists blocked the railroads, trapping them in the city. The once thriving black community of Wilmington was now under siege, its leaders either dead, imprisoned, or forced into exile. By the end of the day, the coup was complete. Alfred Waddell had declared himself mayor, and the new government, installed by violence, was firmly in place. Wilmington, once a symbol of black success, had been brutally transformed into a city of fear and white supremacy. As the fires smoldered and the gunfire faded, Wilmington lay in ruins. The coup had succeeded, and white supremacists now controlled the city. Alfred Waddell, the self-declared mayor, wasted no time solidifying his grip on power. The black city officials who had not been killed or exiled were forced to resign at gunpoint. The democratically elected government had been completely dismantled. For Wilmington's black community, life had turned into a nightmare. Many had lost their homes, businesses, and loved ones. Fear gripped the survivors as white militias patrolled the streets, ready to crush any form of resistance. Thousands of black residents, unsure of their future, fled the city entirely. Once the largest black majority city in North Carolina, Wilmington was rapidly losing its black population. Meanwhile, the white press celebrated the coup as a necessary act of restoring order. Newspapers across the South praised the removal of black officials and declared Wilmington a model for white supremacy. The North Carolina Democratic Party, emboldened by the coup's success, vowed to spread its white supremacist policies across the state. The terror extended beyond Wilmington. Across North Carolina, laws were quickly enacted to ensure that black citizens would never regain political power. Literacy tests, poll taxes, and grandfather clauses were introduced to prevent black men from voting. What had begun as a local coup in Wilmington soon became the foundation for decades of Jim Crow oppression. Despite the violence and injustice, there was no federal intervention. President William McKinley remained silent, refusing to take action against the coup's leaders. With no consequences for their crimes, Waddell and his followers remained in power, rewriting history to portray themselves as saviors rather than criminals. One of the most shocking aspects of the Wilmington coup was how quickly it was erased from history. Unlike other acts of racial violence, such as the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, the Wilmington coup was not widely discussed for decades. Instead, white leaders deliberately rewrote the story to portray the coup as a justified uprising rather than an illegal overthrow. White-controlled newspapers continued to spread lies about what had happened. They claimed that black citizens had started the violence, forcing whites to defend themselves. This false narrative became the official history taught in North Carolina schools for generations. Many textbooks described the event as a race riot, completely omitting the fact that it was a planned coup. Survivors of the coup, particularly black residents who had fled Wilmington, rarely spoke about it. The trauma of the massacre, combined with the fear of retaliation, led many to keep silent. The families of the victims carried the scars of that day, but without any acknowledgement from the government or media, their stories faded into obscurity. Meanwhile, the men responsible for the coup faced no punishment. Alfred Waddell remained in power as mayor, and many of the coup's leaders went on to hold high-ranking positions in the state government. Josephus Daniels, the newspaper editor who had helped fuel the violence, later became the U.S. Secretary of the Navy. Instead of being treated as criminals, they were celebrated as Southern heroes. For more than a century, the Wilmington Coup remained a buried chapter of American history. It was not until historians and activists in the late 20th and early 21st centuries began uncovering the truth that the story was finally brought to light. But even today, the full scale of the coup and its impact remains unknown to many Americans. The Wilmington Coup was not just an isolated event, it was a turning point in American history. It marked the beginning of an era of systematic black disenfranchisement and the rise of Jim Crow laws across the South. The successful overthrow of a legally elected government sent a clear message: black political power would not be tolerated. Following the coup, white supremacist politicians in North Carolina and other southern states used Wilmington as a blueprint. They passed laws making it nearly impossible for black citizens to vote. Poll taxes and literacy tests, combined with violent intimidation, ensured that black political participation was all but eliminated. By 1900, black voter turnout in North Carolina had dropped from more than 120,000 to just a few thousand. The economic impact on black Wilmington was devastating. Many of the city's most successful black business owners had been forced to flee, and their properties were either destroyed or taken over by white owners. Without access to economic opportunities, black citizens who remained in Wilmington were pushed into low-paying labor jobs, stripping away the financial independence they once had. Nationally, the coup emboldened white supremacist groups across the country. The idea that white men could use violence to maintain racial control became widely accepted. This mentality helped fuel future acts of racial terror, from lynchings in the South to race massacres in cities like Tulsa and Rosewood. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of all was that the Wilmington Coup proved that democracy itself could be violently overthrown without consequence. It set a dangerous precedent, one that, in many ways, continues to influence American politics today. For much of the 20th century, the Wilmington Coup remained a hidden history, but in the 1990s and early 2000s, historians and activists began working to uncover the truth. Through archival research, oral histories, and public awareness campaigns, they pieced together what had really happened on November 10, 1898. In 2006, the state of North Carolina officially acknowledged the coup for the first time. The Wilmington Race Riot Commission released a detailed report confirming that it had been a premeditated overthrow of the government, not a spontaneous riot. The report also detailed the role that newspapers, politicians, and business leaders had played in the coup. Despite these efforts, the fight for justice remained difficult. Some descendants of the victims pushed for reparations, arguing that black families who lost property and businesses deserved compensation. However, state officials resisted these calls, claiming that too much time had passed. In recent years, there has been a renewed effort to educate the public about the Wilmington Coup. Documentaries, books, and museum exhibits have helped bring the story to a wider audience. Schools in North Carolina have begun incorporating the event into history lessons, ensuring that future generations understand its significance. Yet, despite these advances, many Americans still do not know about the Wilmington Coup. The work to fully acknowledge and address its impact continues, as activists fight to ensure that this dark chapter in history is never forgotten again. The Wilmington Coup serves as a stark reminder of how fragile democracy can be. It shows how racism, propaganda, and political ambition can lead to the destruction of democratic institutions. The events of 1898 are not just history, they are a warning. One of the key lessons from Wilmington is the power of misinformation. White supremacist newspapers played a major role in fueling the coup, spreading lies that justified violence. This echoes modern concerns about disinformation and how it can be used to manipulate public opinion. The coup also highlights the dangers of political violence. In 1898, a group of armed men overthrew a government without consequences. This raises important questions about how political extremism can threaten democracy in any era. Finally, Wilmington reminds us of the importance of historical truth. For more than a century, the coup was erased from history, allowing the perpetrators to escape justice. This shows why it is essential to confront the past, no matter how painful, to prevent similar injustices from happening again. As Wilmington reckons with its past, there is hope for the future. Efforts to honor the victims and educate the public continue to grow. Street signs, memorials, and historical markers now acknowledge the truth of what happened. The city has also made strides in addressing racial inequality, though challenges remain. Economic disparities, rooted in the aftermath of the coup, still affect Wilmington's Black community. Recognizing this history is the first step toward meaningful change. The Wilmington coup was a tragedy, but remembering it can serve as a powerful tool for progress. By learning from the past, we can work toward a more just and equitable future. The 1898 Wilmington coup was not just a tragic event. It was a deliberate attack on democracy and racial equality. For too long, this history was buried, rewritten, or ignored. But now that the truth is known, we must ensure it is never forgotten again. Spread awareness, share this story with others. Talk about it in your communities, post about it on social media, and encourage schools to include it in their history lessons. The more people know about Wilmington, the less likely history is to repeat itself. Support historical justice. Advocate for policies that acknowledge and address the long-term consequences of racial violence. Whether it's supporting educational initiatives, reparations discussions, or memorial projects, every effort counts in honoring those who suffered. Stand against disinformation and injustice. The Wilmington coup was fueled by lies and fear-mongering. Today, misinformation continues to threaten democracy. Be critical of the narratives you encounter, fact-check sources, and call out harmful rhetoric when you see it. Engage with history locally and nationally. Visit museums, support historical research, and engage with organizations working to preserve Black history. Learn about similar events that have shaped your own community's past and advocate for their inclusion in public discourse. History is only as powerful as the lessons we take from it. The Wilmington coup showed us the dangers of white supremacy, political violence, and erasing history. By remembering this past, we take a step toward building a future where democracy is protected, truth is valued, and justice is upheld. The work isn't over, it's just beginning. Will you be part of the change? Please like, subscribe, and share. Bye, history lover.